So before we go ahead and start testing, I would like to also show you how the regular user role or scopes management can actually be implemented. I'm just going to copy all of this here, go to the regular user and dump it in. And again, I need to change this to call this regular, not admin, not going to be an admin, going to be a regular user like this, and change this again to new regular user. And that's what we're going to return here. And yes, here. Yep. So the difference more or less would be that for a super admin, there's not going to be any restrictions more or less. And so for a super admin, the scopes doesn't make sense. I mean, in essence, because he's not going to be tied to them. Then organization admin will be limited to their organization alone, and what it means is that our org admins will have just one scope, and that scope would be that for their organization. That's it. Now, but for a regular user, that would be totally different. So what it means is that there's going to be an array of scopes, and of course detailing what they have permissions and what they don't have permissions to access. And so what it means is that of course we can reuse most of this logic, but what needs to change would be more or less what happens in here. And to do that, what it simply means is that we need to modify this query to accommodate the scopes that will be in here, and that's really all that needs to change. And if you're wondering what this means in essence, what this actually means is that we will need to write queries that look like this. You can say select everything from our DB. I think I called it DB.example. And now this is where the logic comes in. We say something like where, because again, remember, every single thing, every single entity in our application will have a scope, must have a scope. So whether be it users, be it accounts, be it whatever items, they will all have scopes. So this will tell us where they belong, more or less. So we can now leverage this and say where scope and then this is where we pass our argument. So in this case, it's going to be, of course, we use this % again, and then we'll pass our first scope 1 like this. And what it means is that we can now do an OR, and then we repeat this, and we can repeat this as many times as we want. So this is going to help us. So if this regular user, for example, has 4 scopes attached to them, in the end our query over here is just going to look like this. So each time they try to fetch users, we will always have this in the query. So this is really what the thought process actually is here. To do this, there are actually a number of ways we can go about it. We can actually maybe come up over here and create a function that helps us pass scopes. I don't know, so maybe it takes an array of strings and returns a string in the end. And so that way we can actually pass the scopes, and then it's just going to return or generate more or less a really long string that we can put over here. Or what we can also do maybe down here is to maybe look through our scopes. So we'll look through the range of our user scopes like this, and then we simply do something like this. I'm just going to copy this here and put this over here, and then instead of this, we replace this with our scope like this, so that in the end we simply just return DB like this. And we can again just copy this, bring that over here, and that's more or less it. So what it means now, if we can actually go ahead and get rid of this, and I'm not going to go this route, but I'll leave that for you to try it out. So but what it means is now if this user has 5 scopes or whatever attached to them, we can already do something like this and modify this query before we actually interact with our database. So this, I think, is a lot cleaner and reduces the overhead of having to make a query first to a different service and get a response, validate the response, then check if the user actually has permissions before we actually perform the query we want to perform. I just feel this is an overkill, and that's why I'm taking this route. So what I would want to do next is to actually go ahead. We will create 3 users. One will be a global admin, an organization admin, and a regular user. And then we will make queries when we assume these different roles for these different users, and we'll make queries with their permissions, and then we'll see what happens in the end. So I think that should be the fun part. So let's really jump into that right away. So now that we have all of this set up, we just need to go ahead and use it more or less. So if you remember, if you go, for example, to our method for, let's say, let's go to maybe let's go to create user. So if you pay attention, we'll see that after we validate the token that a user has, and of course the request and everything, we just simply get this client, which is our DB client. You can see over here, nothing special, just establish it connecting to our database, and then we make our request. This is really what we are doing. And so, but what we need to now do is more or less to have all these roles that we define wrap around the client, so that it modifies the client depending on the permissions that the given user has. So that way we don't have to go ahead and just use this directly, but we have our roles wrap around it. So this would be just one straightforward way of using the implementation we have so far. And we're gonna just do what we're gonna do right now is just to go ahead and set it up and use it and see how it works at the end. And what this, of course, again means in essence for us is that most of these methods we have here defined on the user, we will not be using them anymore, because it doesn't allow us to, again, manage our permissions based on the scopes that we've attached to a user, and of course all the resources on our application. So yep, the first thing I would want to do is I'll create a folder here, and I can call this data manager. And in here I have to create one for all our entities. So we have one, the only entity we have right now is our user, so I can create one called user.go and package data manager. And what this is gonna do for us is actually pretty straightforward. So it's just gonna establish so what I've done now is to open our old implementation on the right, and the new file that I created, this is going to act as our manager. Like, it's going to wrap all the queries we would ever need to make it through our user entity. And I have this on the left, so we'll try to more or less replicate what we have on the right on the left. So the first thing I would want to do is I'll create a struct. That's just going to have us to more or less wrap the important objects or information or data we feel would be necessary for our query. I can call this user manager. I can maybe user query manager. Like this is going to be a struct, of course, and it's going to have a number of things. It's going to have a table, which is going to be a string. It's going to have a user role model, which is going to be of type this. It's going to have a DB, which is going to be of course a pointer to our GomDB. It's going to have what else do we want? So it's going to have user role, which is going to be a string, and it's also going to have user scopes, which is going to be an array of string like this. So this is what it's gonna look like. So now I will just create a function that's gonna export this for us. So I can call this func new user query manager. It's simply just gonna return two things. One will be our user query manager or an error, like this. And so here, of course, I would like to provide, maybe I'll collapse this so we have some room. and I would like to of course provide our DB, and then I like to provide the user scope, which is going to be an array of strings, and then user row, which is going to be a string. And pretty straightforward, we return our user query manager like this, and of course new. So but before we do that, I would like to do some validations. So I can say if db is equal to new, or just to make sure or most of these are provided, or user role, if this is equal to new, or maybe if our user scopes, I'll always try to make this plural. If this is equal to maybe an empty array, if that's ever the case, then I will want to return user query manager. I would like to return this and an error, and so if it's an empty string like this, what is the error here? Yeah, so if this is equal to new, this should be fine. So we return this user, so we return this and an error, and here we can say something like the incomplete vars provided, and I'll let you to get more creative with this anyways. So now I can define my role. So this will be from user rows, this should be from user role dot role, and now I can define my role this way because I'm trying to row.role, and then I want to pass the user role that was provided, and from this I create my model and the possible error, and this is going to come from row.row model. So we call this function, and then we pass our scopes like this. Actually we need to pass, let's see, sorry, so this should be user scopes, and now we can do some error handling. So we say if this error is not equal to nil, then here again we return the user query manager like this and the error. But of course, if everything goes well until this point, so now we can return back to the user. So here I would like to provide the table. I'm just going to hard code this for now. So our table is called dbo.example, and user role model, I'll pass the model, and user role, of course I have this here, pass the user role, and user scopes, I'll pass the user scopes, and db, of course pass the db. Pretty straightforward. So this is one way we can have a wrapper over our like what we have here on the right, and now I can basically just copy a couple of this. So I can maybe take this first one. Which one can I take? So let's go to our users that go, no, not you. Is it this one? No, this is the API definition, not you, close out these ones, close out this. And so here we are actually making use of this get method, which is this one over here. And so I can actually just copy this, actually bring it over here and dump it here. The only difference now would be this will not be pointing to our user, but now it would be tied to this query manager more or less. And of course I can just change it to table like this. But the only thing now that needs to change more or less would be after the table, after we provided the table, now I would now like to make use of everything we've done until now. So I use the scopes function, and within the scopes function I can come and user row model, and I call the pass user scopes, and inside of this yes, that's what it should be. Inside of this passing user scopes, I would like to pass my let's see what the now I can actually close this one. Let's see what arguments look like. So it requires a db. So now I provide my user.db, and I need to provide now my base scopes, and now I can after the db, and now I can actually pass let's say my user.row model pass user permissions read, because I know if you get to this get endpoint you'll be trying to read what we have. So this is what the wrapper would have over our initial query, the one we wrote initially. So instead of just going ahead and make a query, we would add all of this on top of it. And I think this is pretty much elegant in my opinion, if you ask me. And so for now I'm just gonna leave this for the get method only, and then we'll try to of course come over here, and at this point instead of just using this directly to make our query, I would now like to create a new manager here, and this would be our new user, what did we call it? We call it new user query manager. So here I can have data manager dot new user query manager, and I pass the db. And so now I am assuming that we would get the scopes and the role, of course, either from the session or from the header of the request we have, or maybe as the cookie, or whatever the case may be. And but just to maybe show a demo, probably what I will do is I'll come over here, I will define some scopes, and this would be an array of strings, and again I'll pass role, this would be a string, and now I can quickly pass those here. So my scopes will be scopes, and my role would be this role, and I think this of course returns 2 things. So we'd still do our error validation. So maybe I can now get rid of this actually, and nope, that's not what I want, but I can quickly copy this one over here, and I'd simply just check my error like this. So if this error is not equal to nil, and then I return. But once everything goes well, instead of this part, I can actually now replace this part with my manager. So I'll now say .get, and no, 1 second. Yes, I will still leave this find, but I'm gonna get rid of this and replace it with the manager. So it's gonna be manager.get, and I pass the db, and now I do a find. So this is more or less what it should look like, and we're gonna go ahead and test this out and see how it behaves. And this request right now is not being used, and I don't think I'll ever use it again because I don't really need this in my gets. I don't care about any payload anyways. So this is what it's going to look like. So we're just going to go ahead and test it and see if it behaves as we expected. And I think before we do that, we need to go ahead and create 3 users with 3 different permissions. And so I can bring up our terminal one more time so we can run our server, and I can go to our HTTP one more time, and then come over to create, And now here I can create those three permissions. So I have here, I'm just first going to go ahead and delete what we have in the database so that we start with a clean slate. So I can go ahead and start the server, go run main.go, and when it starts, I'm just going to go ahead and try to fetch all the users we have, just so you can see that it's completely empty right now. So our server is up, and then we try to get, oh no, I think we first need to do a login. We have some error. Yeah, of course we don't have any user anymore. So but I'll try to go ahead and create this user. And now we get our users. Let's look at the credentials. So here it should be admin. So this will be our first user actually. So admin, and the password is still password. So we try to log in now. And now we have our token. I'm just gonna copy it from here. This is our token. And I'm going to replace this one with the new token we have. Replace this one. So this will be our new token. And now what we would want to do more or less is to go ahead and create the other users that we need. Actually, I think we made a mistake because our global admin is not supposed to have any scopes. So I'm going to delete that one again and then create a new one. Or I can actually just modify it in the database and remove these scopes. That's totally fine. And that's probably what I'm going to do, yeah. And yeah, so I'm now just going to go ahead and create the other users. So this admin will be my global admin. And actually I don't have any global admin anymore, so I'll get rid of this. So I have a super admin. So I need to reflect it in the name. I call this super. The last name will be admin, and the email will be superadmin at gmail.com. Password for all of them would be password. So scopes would be actually empty because we really don't need it. For global admin, it doesn't matter. So we create our super admin, and it's a success, as you can see over here. And now we need to create for our org admin. I think it was called org admin. Yes, that's fine. So here I just changed this part to org admin. Again, here will be org admin, and the email again is to reflect that. So org admin. And for this guy, again, we said it's just gonna have one scope, which will of course be the organization. Of course, in this case, it's just going to be assumed that we already have a list of organizations, because the groups need to, if you remember the hierarchy we created, the groups needs to be part of organization, every single group. So let's assume we already have a group called org1, more or less. So that would be the only scope that this org admin would have. So we can save this. And now for our regular user, call this regular user. So the email again needs to reflect that. So regular user at gmail.com, and this would be regular user. And this regular user is going to be a type organization 1. So it's going to be in. So I'm just going to copy what I had initially and then modify the results. That's really, I don't have to type everything out, so I can just put this here and it's already there for us. So just to confirm, it's called regular user. So close this up again. So regular user, and now we save, we create this user again, and it's a success. So we've created all the 3 users that we need. So what we have to do now is we try to log in as each of these individual users, and then we try to make a query and see what we get. And of course I'm going to use the insomnia so we can see the tokens and everything that has been persisted. So let's go ahead and do that right away. So before we start testing, I just realized we've omitted something actually in our setup. And if you can already guess, is that if we go to our user model, you would see that even though we have roles defined and we have scopes, the user scopes we define, like the permissions the user can have, that user itself has no scope with which it can be identified. And I think this is also what I realized also in our queries. Of course, this should work with any other setup we have where that user has a scope, but right now it doesn't. And let's fix that and then we can start our testing. So to fix that, we can quickly just go to our models, go to user, and then basically add a new column for our user. And I'm just going to copy this one and put it maybe above it, and I can call it, it will always be called scope for all entities. And of course over here it will be scope, it will be a string, and the column name will also be called scope in the database. So I'm just going to add this right away in the database, and then we can of course continue with our testing. That shouldn't be a problem. But before we do that, I would also like to modify the way we have defined our scopes and roles when we try to retrieve this from the user. So what I would really want to do is actually to just also persist this information at login, and this will really aid us in our test. So I can quickly go to this persist cookie method we have over here and add a new argument. This is going to be of type models.user, this one, and my IDE is quite slow today for no justifiable reason. Okay, so now I can copy this actually, because I would like to persist a couple more things. Two things actually. So one would be user role, and the next would be user scopes, and maybe also the scope of the user. It doesn't hurt nobody, so I put here scope. And this we can of course get from our user.scope. The user role we can get from user.user role, and user scopes we can get from user.user scopes, and we want to stringify it of course, and that should be more or less it. Then here we only need to just pass this user that we have up there, so that when you log in we'll persist this, of course that's not a problem. And the next thing I would of course would want to do is to go to our guest method and then modify how we are retrieving these attributes. So if you remember, we actually had something like this predefined initially, but now I would want to make this look more like what it should look like in the end. So maybe I start with rows. So I'm going to set this equal to c.cookie, and it should be called user role. If we go back to our login and go to this persist key, it's actually called user role. So we want to get it again. It's called user role, and of course it's also going to return an error. I'm just going to forget about the error for now because I don't want this to take longer than it should be. And but again, if you remember here, for the scopes, it was an array more or less, but we had to persist it as a string. But what I would want to do now more or less is to mash out this again into our scopes, which should be a string, which should be of an array of strings. And because of that, I'll change this to a var this way. And now I can, over here, I can say scope string. I also throw this error away. Please don't do this. Handle every error graciously. So user scopes, and we have the string. And what I would want to do now more or less is to json.onMarshall. Again, I'll first turn this to bytes. So this would be my scope string, and of course I'll now marshal this into our scopes like this. This is what I would want to do. And so that should be it, more or less. So again, we are getting this from the cookies, and now using this to instantiate our manager. So now I would just want to again go ahead, add this scope column to our table, and then we can just test this and wrap this all up. I've gone ahead to make a couple of modifications to our queries. So because for login, I'm still not actually making so much changes for now. I'm just going to focus on our get, which is like when we get new users. So that's where we will test our RBAC implementation. But what I've done is I've added this new method here called get by email, and it's doing not so much, basically just query by email. That's it. And so, and of course in login, I've gone ahead to actually use that function over here, and then we pass the email that we get from the query. Like, this is pretty straightforward. And so that's the whole point, is like, I don't want us to focus on the login, so we can seamlessly log in, provide an email, we'll verify the password, and then you're logged in. That's totally fine. But the focus, of course, for us will be when you try to fetch users, and then this can of course be extended to any other resource you have: fetch accounts, fetch items, whatever it is you would want to fetch in the end. So, but I think this is okay for now. We'll just move over and test our 3 users. Again, I've gone ahead to create a scope in the database, and I'm just also going to show you all the users. I'm just going to fetch all of them and show you what they look like before we start working with them. So let's go ahead and test, and then we can see what happens. We can actually see how that works out for us at the end. So we are right here in Insomnia. I have provided the credentials of the super admin. So remember, the super admin is supposed to have like godlike permissions, so you should be able to see everything. So this would be the permissions, say, the developer should have at the time of development, and other than that, you can actually just scrap those accounts. So, but we go ahead and log in as a super admin, and then if we look at the cookies that gets persisted for us, you see our scope, more or less, this is just some slash, because it has to see everything. And then of course the role is user super admin, and again that's what we have over here as a token. These ones we had initially. So again, we have the token over here, and then if this user tries to fetch all users, if we send a request, the same URL, you would see that he's able to see all the users. So this would be the admin. This will be the organization admin. If you see for this admin, this is the path. I can actually make this unique because I want all of the scopes to start and end with a /, and I can quickly change that in the database right now, and then we can just make a query again and see it's reflect the change. So like, I make the query again and user scopes, 1 second, should be here. This is here, so I just add this here. I want all of them to start and end with backslashes, just for uniformity, to avoid confusions. So now if I make the query again, we should say this here. So this organization admin is able to see everything that is scoped to the root of this organization called org1. And then we have over here this regular user. This regular user is only allowed to see things that are scoped to Europe, Germany, Berlin, and then this group, like within this account as well. And of course we have our super admin here who can see everything. So if you see over here, the scope is just a slash, and then the user scopes is that you can see everything. So that's also what you see over here in the scopes. If we go to manage cookies, that's also what you see over here. So what I can now do is to go to the login and then try to log in again as another user. So now instead of the super admin, I would like to log in as the org admin, and I log in, and now you see the credentials of course changes. Now it's org admin over here and no longer super admin, and of course it's the same endpoint, but because it's a different user with permissions that we've defined, we get something different. And then if we go to get users, the same endpoint, and we make the request, now you see he doesn't even see everything. He just sees himself, who happens to be the org admin, and of course the regular admin. He's able to see the regular admin again because they belong to the same organization, and he can see everything in this organization. And now, of course, lastly, if we test for the regular user, it's going to be what's called the regular user, and login. And now we see the same endpoint again, just only that his permissions is just different. If we login should be fine. And then if we try to get users, we should not actually see anything, because from the permissions that this user have, there's no user currently below this level. So what it means is he's definitely not going to be able to manage any user, because there are currently no users that he has more permission than, more or less. So he can edit, delete, whatever, any users at all. And that's really the goal. And so, like I said in the beginning, I am actually I have been more or less working on a library, more or less, that can be used to, of course, manage permissions in an application. So it's basically something you could instantiate and then have it, of course, be able to work with this more or less in your project. But again, I'm going to keep you posted when this is done, and then publish it so that I can, of course, also get feedbacks from people, and maybe also see how people are able to accept it and maybe use it in their own projects. And anyways, that will be all for this tutorial. I don't want it to, it's already getting too long, but I really hope you got something, because for me, the whole idea has and will always be more or less to try to improve. It doesn't really matter if something works, doesn't mean it can be improved. That's really the idea. And for me, again, like I said in the beginning, I always like to squeeze out every form of speed I could from my application as much as possible. And anyways, that will be all for now. And please, if anything is not clear or you have questions, of course, feel free to leave them. I will get back to you as soon as possible. And of course, if you're new to our channel, just go ahead and subscribe, and of course turn the notification bell, and I can always guarantee you that I will always bring you like practical tutorials that you can use in your application. Doesn't matter the scale, like they are real practical solutions, which I of course use in my projects. And anyways, that will be all for now. Thank you so much for being part of this journey, and until next time, have a lovely evening, and bye bye.